Thank you for those reminders of what I'm supposed to do. Thank you. It's recording now. We got it. All right. So here we are, and I saved this portion of Acts 15. I didn't want to talk about it last week because there was this moment of the first church council, where they had to deal with an issue. I find this very comforting because it means that when you're church, you don't always have the answers and you have to figure it out. And we go to God in prayer. And just as our ancestors were working through this issue, we work through the same issues. We have to ask again and again, how do we do this? There was no book out there, how to be church in COVID during COVID-19, right? Nobody had the book. And so why I love the book of Acts, because it's like, how are we the church in the first century? Well, nobody has a manual. Nobody has the primer. There's nothing. We have to figure this out as we go along. And so that's the joy of being at St. Luke at this moment, is that we're all working together. We're working together, trying to figure out how can we be church in Devon? How can we be church? How can we do this at this time? Which is to me, it's exciting. I hope you don't see that my excitement. I shouldn't, my excitement. This is so much fun to be the people of God and to work together. So there was a meeting, and they made a decision that if you are a Gentile and you wish to become a Christian, God loves you, we love you. To those individuals who were saying, you need to become Jewish, then you can become Christian. No, we're not going to put that obstacle there. Okay, so that's an important decision. There's one thing that I didn't say last week that I want to say this week. In all of Paul's letters, when he's dealing with this very issue of individuals who say, you need to do this, this, and this in order to be a Christian, Paul never in any of his letters references this decision. He never uses it. He never uses it. And there's sort of this moment of, and you have to ask yourself the question, why didn't he use this? It would have been easy to say, well, James, the brother of Jesus, said this, we all voted. It was a unanimous vote. This is a bylaw. This is a bylaw. And this is it. We're done. It's an interesting moment. And the way I interpret it is Paul is asking them through his own, he's asking them, what would you like? What do you think we should do?
Call from Oxford, PA.
Oh, okay.
Call from Oxford, PA.
So what he's saying, let's work through the issue. Let's talk about this. He'll talk about this to the churches in Galatia. He's going to talk about this in the churches in Corinth. He's going to talk about this time and time again, where he's going to ask people, he's going to confront this same situation, but he doesn't invoke this authority because he's saying, in light of Jesus' death and resurrection, what do you think God would want us to do? And so what he's doing in these congregations is he's raising them up to be thinking people who are praying and saying, what is it that God would like us to do at this moment? Am I making some sense? Some sense here? He doesn't invoke this because he's saying, I want you, if you're the leaders of a church, of a congregation, what do you think God would like you to do? Instead of saying, well, it says this and here it is, it's written here, this is what we have to do. Paul is asking, how does the love of God get expressed? How would the love of God be expressed in our thought, in our words, and in our deeds? Oh, I like that. I like the way I just phrased that. How would we be church? How would we be church in our thought, in our words, and in our deeds. And so he never calls upon this. He doesn't call upon this decision because he wants to work it out in letters with people who are now being church, in the first century. And it sort of leaves it open-ended to us as we are church in the 21st century. How do we work out? What is it God would like us to do in terms of our thought, in our words, in our deeds? When you were at the Washington Memorial Chapel and I announced the Holy Gospel according to, they were a little higher church, and then you made the sign of the cross, and you did here, here, and here. It was thought, word, and deed. And so you made this motion, you did this motion, you made this motion, everybody made this motion simply to say, Jesus is coming and is going to ask us about our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. So I love that moment. I love that moment. And I just wanted to share that with you. And I didn't want to bring that up last week because it was like we were moving forward in this discussion. Now I'm going to be in Acts 15, verse 36. This is church, and this is honest church history. This is where Luke is the historian, and he's not he is not glossing over problems. History is sometimes not neat and tidy. So verse 36, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let's return and visit the brothers in every town where we proclaimed the word of the Lord to see how they are doing. Oh, I love that. I love that verse. I love that verse. You know, let's go back, see how they're doing. Let's check in. This is before Zoom. This is before cell phones. This was before telephones. This is before telegrams. Let's go back. We need a face-to-face encounter. Let's see how they're doing. I want to know how they're doing, as they are the people of God. I love that. Let's check in. Let's check in, see how they're doing. So Barnabas wanted to bring John, called Mark, along with them too. But Paul insisted that they should not take along this one who had left them in Pamphylia and had not accompanied them in the work. Verse 39, this is it. They had a sharp disagreement, so that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. Paul chose Silas and set out, commended to the grace of the Lord by the brothers and sisters. He passed through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. Ooh, I love it. Church history, honest, brutal. Church history, there it is. They had a sharp disagreement. All right, there we are. They had a sharp disagreement. I like that. You know, so what do you want to do with it? So what I'm going to do right now, and so we can chat, I'm going to break this up a little bit differently. I'm going to pause. So here we are. We're going to start chapter 16. And this is another moment in Paul that is very interesting, because it looks like he's contradicting everything he has said. So he also came to Derbe and to Lystra. A disciple named Timothy was there. Now this verse is important. The son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but whose father was a Greek. The brothers in Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was Greek. Okay. This sounds like it's a contradiction to what just went down in Acts 15, where the decision was made, no, you do not need to become Jewish in order to become Christian. You don't need to be circumcised. You don't need to have a kosher kitchen. Love is here. Love is here. You will be accepted. So what is happening here? And again, I look at this through the lens of Paul as an administrator. Timothy is a very interesting person. He's a believer. Now notice how Luke phrases this. His mom was Jewish. His father was a Greek. Of course. He has the name Timothy. As soon as you introduce him as Timothy, it's like, oh, Greek name. How are you here? You know, so what is Paul's template for ministry? I go into the synagogues first and I start talking to my compatriots. I share the good news that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has come to us in the person of Jesus, who is the Christ, the one we've been waiting for, the Messiah. This is the good news. Believe this message. This is the one. So he always wants to go to the synagogues and he wants to take Timothy. So what's happening here? Is he backing up on his principles? Or is he being, I need my best hitter right now. Bases are loaded. I need my best hitter. So what does he do? He has Timothy circumcised, because as soon as Timothy introduces himself, everybody knows you've got a Greek name. Who's Greek? Who's Greek? My dad. What's your mom? My mom was Jewish. In Judaism, after Ezra and Nehemiah, Judaism is defined by the bloodline of your mother. Okay? So when I first heard this, I thought, wow, what a liberating principle is out there. You know, women are accredited for, you carry the bloodline. Isn't this nice? And then finally somebody sat me down and said, excuse me, you might not know the father, but you do know the mom. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So Judaism after Ezra and Nehemiah said, if you are Jewish, your mother has to be Jewish. That's after Ezra and Nehemiah. Which is interesting because David has some non-Jewish women in his line, you know? So it's like, and I love the scriptures. I love the scriptures. Why? Because they put all of this together. It's a process which is being defined. And so, you know, not all of my mother and some of my grandmothers were Gentiles. That causes an issue after Ezra and Nehemiah, because they have returned from exile. See, they were in Babylon in the exile, and they have been released after 40 years when Cyrus, the Persian, conquers the Babylonians and says, I am not interested in transplanting populations. Go home. If you want to go home, go home. And they go home. And they find that individuals, as you transplant populations, you now have Jewish people marrying Gentiles. There was a mixing here. Hence, you have what we call Samaritans. The Samaritans were Jewish in a sense, but they had intermarried. And this was like, oh, we who remained loyal and faithful to the laws, we didn't do this. Therefore, we are more than you. Does that make, do you see where I'm headed with this? So Paul's in this situation. Everybody knows his dad is Greek because of his name. And so Paul decides that, okay, when we go into a synagogue, what is going to happen here is there'll be a meeting. Before Paul goes in, Paul will introduce himself to the leadership in a synagogue. And he will say, this is who I am. I am from Tarsus. And everybody goes, ooh, I was trained by Gamaliel. I was trained by the best. Here is my assistant. His name is Timothy. And all ears will turn and go, that's a Greek name. Yes, he is Greek, but his mother is Jewish and he has been circumcised. It's a conversation. So he has the appropriate credentials to then be fully welcomed into the synagogue. Does that make some sense as to what I'm trying to say? Yeah? Yeah, please. Let me pause the recording and then we can all sing. So we have now covered where Paul and Barnabas part company. We now see that Timothy joins Paul and Silas, and Timothy has been circumcised. And now we come to verse 6, and I'm just going to go from verse 6 to verse 10, because there's a shift in the pronouns. And the shift in the pronouns gives us some piece of information that we sometimes may miss. So they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been prevented by the Holy Spirit from speaking the message in the province of Asia. When they came to Mysia, they attempted to go to Bithynia, that's in northern Turkey, and we'll have a map next week. But the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them to do this. So they passed through Mysia and went down to Troas. It's right on the coastline of current Turkey, right? If you stood in Troas and looked, you would look across the sea to Greece. So we're right at the coastline here. And a vision appeared to Paul during a night. A Macedonian man was standing there urging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. Okay. So he's being called. They're praying about this, and the way they come to expressing their decision is he has a vision, and they're being called to Macedonia. Come to Macedonia, cross over onto the European continent. Okay. Okay, and that's what they're going to do. Now, come over to Macedonia and help us. And here's verse 10, and this is astonishing. After Paul saw the vision, we attempted immediately to go over to Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. It's no longer third person, it becomes first person. The way we read this is Luke has joined in on the journey. Luke is present. And Luke is going to be present at certain times. All of a sudden, the pronoun shifts from third person to first person. And the only conclusion we can come to is Luke is here. So Luke, the historian, is participating in this. So it's Acts 16, verse 10. After Paul saw the vision, we attempted immediately to go over to Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. Luke is here. Okay. And Luke, instead of saying, hi, oh, me, us, Luke, including Luke, if we were writing a paper for our history class, we would put in comma, Luke, we would spell it out, but it's not. He just shifts the pronouns, and he shifts the pronouns, and all of a sudden it's first person. There's a first person narrative going on. Well, who could this be? And we assume the conclusion we reach is that this is probably Luke who's with them. So here we are, people of God. I'm going to stop the recording right